And we're so happy to host Christian Benimana today. I'm Mette Ramsgaard-Thomsen. I'm professor here at the Royal Danish Academy at the Institute of Building Technology. I'm very pleased to host today. I had a few slides prepared to show you a little bit of context. Turns out to be difficult to show, but I will draw your picture. We are at IBT, we are collaborating on the UIA World Congress, Sustainable Futures Leave No One Behind, which we've been working on for now, I think, over 2 years. We've been working with Christian and a great team of people. And this lecture series that we've had the luck to be able to coordinate with here at the Royal Academy is also understood as a set of pre-events that allow us to start up the dialogue and start having the discussions and the exchanges and getting to know each other better before the actual event, which will be in the summer of 2023 in July. What you will see in the school and both here and also in Aarhus is that we'll have a lot of different activities, and we will have the actual World Congress here in Copenhagen at Bella Center, which we're looking very, very much forward to. The World Congress asks, what can architecture do to achieve, or how can we contribute to achieving the SDGs? And here at the Academy, we have worked a lot with the SDGs. We have understood them from their inception, very much guided by Lenen Derman Lund's incentive to place this in the center of our curriculum and our research. And I feel that what has the opportunity with working with the World Congress is really to scratch and to get a bit deeper into this. I think it can seem a bit easy. Sometimes we are shown the SDGs as a nice color palette, a mosaic that can be stamped on all sorts of good intentions. I think when we start scratching into what's actually lying beneath the surface, the picture gets more complicated. And especially for architects, because when you read the SDGs, you will find that actually the SDGs hardly mention architecture. We are simply not in the picture. We're there under resilient communities, there's urbanism, it's understood, but the true agency and power of design and architectural thinking is simply not present to the UN. So I think the opportunity for us in the scientific committee that I have the joy of leading has been really to try to say, well, here we are working for the UIA. The UIA is the interest body that discusses directly with the UN. And we are now doing a World Congress, bringing a great group of people together to look at how we can be part of the solution. And we have a voice directly to the UN. So we want to deliver a message to the UN about the agency and potential of architecture for the SDGs. We have been doing this in collaboration with a great scientific committee, of which Christian Benimana and Arif Hassan are chairing the Design for Health panel. We have been so thankful for all the time that you've been putting into this. All of our 16 panel members, it has just been a wonderful experience of trying to develop content and questions around this. So we're so happy that you were able to come here today. I'm so happy that you made this enormous voyage around the whole world here. I want to find myself in my notes. Yes. Yeah, and it is obviously a very great honor to host you. I want to give a few words around your biography to just be able to settle in and see what we are looking at here today. Christian is senior principal and managing director at Mass Design Group, where he has acted as a Global Health Core Design Fellow since 2010. Working out of the Rwanda office, he has led projects such as the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture and the Ruhehe Primary School, to mention just but a few. Mass Design Group, which is a model of architecture serving society, is an international office with a strong ethical practice. It asks how understanding architecture's influence beyond the individual building can give architecture a new critical role in supporting communities to, and here I quote, to confront history, shape new narratives, and collectively heal and project new possibilities to the future. So Christian has an extensive knowledge of architectural industry and architecture in East Africa at large, and his ethos, as we heard today in the masterclass that you ran here, is to think locally with the problems and the cultures of the people that he's designing for. Christian also acts in many different roles within the field. He's founding director of the African Design Center. He served as Secretary General of the East Africa Institute of Architects and was recognized in 2017 with the Quartz Africa Innovator, championing Afrofuturism. He's authored a lot of articles and books, including an African theory of architecture and rethinking the future of African cities, to name just a few. And finally, Christian is also an educator. He's taught at the architectural school at Kigali, the Institute of Science and Technology, and we had the pleasure of being part of your educating role in the masterclass today. And finally, pity I don't have my slides, but you can look at the UIA website for this. We would like to highlight that you can meet Christian again. He will be speaking as part of one of the UIA pre-events, Design for Health, Rethinking Vulnerability, which has been part of arranging together with his co-chair, Arif Hassan of Pakistan. So thank you so much for coming.
Can you hear me? Great. Thanks for a very generous introduction. I guess I'll get right into it. How's everybody feeling? I know it's Thursday, end of the day. Is it a thumbs up? Is it here? Is it? I'd like to check before I begin, because I'm going to be talking for a long time. And I hope I don't bore you with a lot of things that I'll talk about here today. But I'm happy to be here. I'm very honored. I'd like to say that receiving invitations from groups like yourselves and people that want to hear what you're doing is a form of validation for the work we do, and encourages us to want to do it more, because we understand from those invitations extended to us that there is real interest in knowing what we're trying to do. And that helps us, gives us fuel to continue doing it, because it's not easy, I can tell you right up front, and maybe we'll have a chance to discuss about it later. The work I'll talk about today, the reason why I started on this image is that it comes from a collective of people that helps to think about it. So I don't want any of you to walk away thinking that all of this is my work, that I'm a genius, I'm a superhuman. You can think that, that's fine, but it's not true. It's a polling of ideas that come from many different people that have a common goal, that came together because we all have this strong belief in the power of architecture and design, as Mete just said right now. And because of that belief, we believe that we can, if we have intention, do something good with it. And I usually like to start with this quote, who I don't know it is from, but I like it, because it grounds us. It grounds us into a reality that is both dual and expansive, but it's a reality that, you know, we're not here, or we don't exist because we were lied to believe that we're going to change the future. I hear people throw this sentence a lot, like, should design the future we want, and you know, like to believe that that's the purpose of why we're here. The reason I like this quote is because it removes that. The future is going to exist whether we like it or not, whether we participate or not. And it's going to be different than what we want, whether we like it or not. But we should also participate in it, since we're here. and we believe in the power of design. So it poses this question, what can we then do in our existence? So what is the purpose of our intentions in the participation? And I think for us at MAS, our approach to architecture and project work that we do is based on that, is that recognizing that the future is happening, whether we like it or not. And there are forces that are shaping it that we don't always control, all of it. But we want to understand the little we control, the little we have power over. How do we be intentional in applying it in a way that helps shape that future for the better? Because that's where our reach ends. There's nothing we can do beyond that. So a lot of things I'll talk about today is our quests to find that intentionality. How do we become intentional about what we do, how we think about it, and what we've done about it, some of the lessons we've learned, and what we want to do moving forward. So I come from a continent that is experiencing very different problems than I was aware of when growing up, when going to architecture school. And this slide summarizes it. It's a fast surging population growth on the African continent, looking to add about 15% more of the world population in the next 30 years. You don't have to go back into like the entire history of the African continent to know that there haven't been much done in the past for the preparation for all this incoming influx of population. So now the challenge is, how do we do that in the time we have to avert disaster happening? Again, like I said, that future is going to happen whether we like it or not. So what do we do about it? Those people are coming. They'll be there in less than 30 years. So what are we doing about it? What are we going to do about it? Everybody keeps talking about it, from the halls of the UN to Washington, D.C., in every political offices in Africa. Everybody's talking about the population growth in Africa. In Rwanda, though, the country where I come from, small East African and Central Africa, is at the cusp of this population pressure, because we are the mostly densely populated nation on mainland Africa at 597 inhabitants per square kilometer, which means that all these pressures that we feel, we are going to feel on the African continent about population growth, a young population that needs jobs and occupation and everything else, so they don't go into militias and drugs and those sort of things, are more likely to happen in Rwanda before any other nation. That's a big challenge, you might say, but it's also a big opportunity, because then you can imagine if you can crack the solution to that problem, we might stand a chance of informing what the rest of the continent does in preparation for them also starting to feel these population pressures in terms of systems that runs the country, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of opportunities that are provided. So this is the general background of what's happening in the country of Rwanda, why MAS has been fortunate to work there, and why we've shaped the practice of MAS the way it is shaped, because there was a challenge, but there's also like a big opportunity that embraces innovation in solving those problems. And the inspiration of the birth of MAS is very inspired by these two individuals. I have to say from the outset that the gentleman on my right, which is your left, Dr. Paul Farmer, unfortunately passed away earlier this year. He's a big philanthropist, comes from the US. He died in Rwanda. He started the University of Global Health Equity there after like decades of work in the healthcare sector. And the lady on my left, which is your right, is Professor Agnes Binagwaho. When MAS started in 2007, 2008, Agnes Binagwaho was the Minister of Health in Rwanda. And if you know a little bit of background in my country, in 1994, there was a really terrible event that happened in the country, the only 21st century genocide. that saw over 1 million people decimated, killed by their neighbors, friends and family, friends. So we went through this very dark period. We went through its aftermath, which is still continuing and ongoing. But in the middle of all of that, the country made surprisingly very different decisions on looking into the future. They made three big choices that paved the way for what everything is going to look like. The first choice, the new government that came in put in place was unity. They say that we're going to choose to be together. Regardless of what has happened in the past, we need to figure out a path to peace and reconciliation, because that's very important. There was no other way of living divided with animosity, with the potential of killing one another. The second choice they made was, we're going to be accountable to our actions moving forward, so that we don't let things into like suspense and see where they go, what happens, because we saw where it went when we let it to happen to like chances. So as a nation, we decided that if we make a decision, we're going to be accountable for that decision. And then the third choice that the country made was, we're going to dream big. We're not going to be constrained by what's possible or not possible right now in our minds while we are in this state of desolation. If we can think about it, if we can imagine it, if we can dream about it, why can't we do it as a country? And that paved the way to anything the country have done since that time to now in rebuilding the entire nation's systems, from political, social, economic, health, you name it. That also paved the way for us to plug in, because innovation was encouraged. The country recognized that we've met unprecedented problems, therefore we have to rely on unconventional solutions to solve those problems. It was the only way. There was no precedent of what has happened in our country to any other place, therefore we had to be able to figure it out. So these two people, the reason why I'm talking to them is because they were tasked to rebuild the country's healthcare system. And in doing that, they were tasked to do the same thing. They were supposed to dream really big. They said, right now everything is decimated, but you have to dream big. Like, what would be the ideal healthcare system in the country? What would that look like? And how would we rebuild it from scratch, so that by the time we're successful, we can claim to have a healthcare system that supports the best health outcomes anyone can aim for. They've built it. I don't know exactly how it functions. I know some of it, and it has registered some progress already. At the evaluation of the Millennium Development Goals, which are the goals that preceded the Sustainable Development Goals, Rwanda registered the highest reduction in maternal and child death in the world that has ever been recorded, because of this new healthcare system that these people helped to design and implement. So we want to believe that they did something fantastic, and we look at them with reverence, and we've learned a lot from them. The few things that we've learned from them was that the way they thought about healthcare, architecture could really borrow a leaf from that, so that we can transform ourselves and be able to also understand how we plug in into the systems that governs our society in a more productive way. And I'll give you examples. Dr. Paul Farmer is a very good friend of Dr. Kim, who was the president of the World Bank, and another woman called Dr. Ophelia. When they were at Harvard studying public health school, they investigated and healthcare systems and financing and everything else, and they wrote this essay that was very critical of the World Bank, IMF, USAID, and all these other development agencies on how they were approaching financing healthcare drugs, especially for tuberculosis and HIV. Because they argued that the system of financing of pharmaceutical industry was conducive to a system of which poor people don't have access to these medicines, and yet they need them the most. And they argued with these global institutions that they should change their policies so that these drugs can be available to the people that needs them the most, but cannot afford to buy them. And they succeeded. That's how, like in the late 80s, a lot of these policies changed so that people in Haiti, in Africa, in Southeast Asia can have start access to these very expensive drugs that people badly need in these communities. Otherwise, they would have died. They completely refuse to agree that average people should pay the right price of these medicines. That's the type of healthcare they said. So they coined this term of the preferential option for the poor. They actually argued that quality healthcare delivered to the poorest in the world is a form of justice because, as a global community, we have invested in a system that have made them poor. Therefore, we owe it to them when they get ill to treat them with the most dignity possible. And that resonated a lot with us in architecture when we were starting at that time, because we wanted to understand what are the lessons we can learn from them, from how they thought about healthcare, that we can bring into architecture to start having an understanding of how we could achieve probably the same results as them. And this is a way of like thinking that we outlined early on to guide us into understanding how we practice architecture. Mission. Similar to them in healthcare, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. Provide quality healthcare to the poorest. There is no complicated word in that. Everybody who understands English can understand that. It's very simple. Can we do that in architecture? When we asked, not by other architects, can we be able to convey what it is that we want to achieve with every project that we do? That clarity really supports the intentionality that we claim we should have in the development of these things. The next is context and the importance of context. Like them, we want to know exactly where we're working, what it means to be able to not afford HIV that depends on it. What is that frame of mind? What it is that in your village makes you not be able to be prosperous enough to afford medicine that you badly need. Because if you don't ask the right question, it doesn't matter the solution you come up with, it won't be effective in solving the problem. So we have to know and understand the power of the context. The third one is the proof of impact, which is also something that architects, we've shied away for many years. But unfortunately, we have to start investing in understanding if we're successful or not. And I mean, unfortunately, again, it's the work that no one wants to pay us to do, but it does not mean that we should give up on it because it's very important. We need to understand that every thing we do on this planet creates some form of impact, and we want to know if it's positive or negative. If it's negative, then we learn lessons, we correct it if we can, and then we vow not to repeat it again. And if it's positive, we commit to figuring out how to make it even better. It's the only way we're going to continue registering progress. Working upstream, start asking this question is, who benefits from our services? How do we respond to these problems? Where do we start from? Sitting in our offices and waiting for RFPs does not work, has never worked, and it's never going to work. So how do we go and identify the people that deserves our services and like be able to like initiate projects from that time, from that place? Plug in with our knowledge and be able to say, we can help with this. We have the tools, we have the means, we have the capacity of thinking about it. And you have to be intentional about that, because everyone can open a shop and wait for customers to come. We architects, we can't afford to do that. So we need to invest upstream where these problems are before they become projects, because certain decisions have already been made by the time they become a project. And you need to be able to understand and challenge those. And the last thing, similar to Dr. Paul Farmer and Professor Agnes Vinagwaho, we have to commit to understanding that it's not a matter of whether people can afford our services or not, but it's whether it's possible for people to live in healthy environments without our participation. Because admitting that it's possible then says that we are irrelevant, doesn't it? If we agree that people can live in healthier environment in this context without us helping them, then why do we exist, right? So we need to commit to this idea that we have the power to be able to help people to live in healthier environment, and that is their right. So we exist to deliver that right. If you think about it, whenever I talk about health, I talk about the two things that a human being needs to be able to survive. You need to breathe and you need to eat, need food. That's it. Other things come, of course, like as you go in that Maslow pyramid of needs, you can fulfill yourself and do all of those sort of things. But the moment you stop breathing, it's gone. We just went through a dark period where like the suspicion that we might be breathing contaminated air locked us all in our houses and apartments, and we couldn't go out. The entire world froze because we were scared that the air had something that might kill us. So that brings the importance of like why we all need healthier environments, why we should not take that for granted, and why that is a right for every single person living on this planet. So this idea of architecture, illness/wellness, is the birthplace of mass. That's the first thing that brought us here. When we started working with Dr. Paul Farmer and Professor Agnes Vinagwaho, the context was very different. Remember that I said that they were rebuilding an entire nation's healthcare system. So they were very busy and they had like real challenges to deal with, like people dying unnecessarily. So when they asked us to design a hospital in Rwanda, they repeated very clearly that the intervention of us as architects needs to match what they were trying to do on the healthcare side. They were doing something big, and therefore they didn't want to settle for things that are just simple solutions. And we needed to prove to them that it is possible and that what we're doing is actually contributing to what they're doing. Otherwise, there was no project. So again, we took back the books of the history to go to learn when architecture has actually contributed to good health outcomes. When was that? How was it done? And you don't have to go very far in history. I'm not going to lecture you about this. I'm sure you know more than I. Mine might still be very fresh. Florence Nightingale, who wasn't an architect, who was a nurse, made these very special observations about her patients, made very fantastic recommendations that by adjusting the space and the quality of spaces, started saving like hundreds of thousands of people. Things like lifting the beds off the ground, making more like natural light, more natural ventilation, because when she was, treating British soldiers in Crimean War, she noticed that people were not dying from war wounds, but from infections arising from being treated in unsanitary conditions. That's the majority of the people, of the fatalities. And by doing these mere changes, she could remove this entire risk of like infections. Once you get there alive, you actually stand better chances of being treated and get better. Her recommendations, of course, were like groundbreaking. They went on to inspire what was like referred to as the Nightingale Award, which is like this like very probably like the most spread form of like general ward in hospitals in Africa, if I can say that way. Like everywhere you go, even a small clinic you go to, you'll find like a ward that like looks like that. Exactly how like Florence Nightingale recommended they be done. So you can say like she has designed many hospitals without being an architect. And then, you know, there are other more recent examples like Paimio Sanitarium, where like now like this wellness issue was even like more emphasized by an architect because they believed that you could shape space in a way that like supports a person's healing journey through their hard times. And they made like very simple design decisions that you could defend on how they contribute to some of these things. You know, like offering to redesign a sink so that the water does not splash with the sound. Because like you're sharing a room with somebody and they might be disturbed by you when you're washing your hands or your face or things like that. Like small things like that. Because in that particular moment, rest is very important to that person. So you can find good examples where architecture or spatial shaping was utilized as a direct good health outcome. But because we're dealing with doctors, we needed to also be a little bit scientific and show the opposite side that is also possible so that you can support the theory. And you also don't have to look very far in history to find these instances where the architecture, the space, has directly contributed to negative outcomes, health outcomes. This is in Together Ferry, South Africa. It's a small clinic in which people went to because it's a clinic in the community. You go there to seek primary health care. You have a broken finger, you show up there. You have a fever, you show up there. Unfortunately, on that fateful day in 2005, somebody showed up with a multi-drug resistant tuberculosis strand because they were not feeling well and waited in a hallway that was poorly ventilated with other people who were there for a whole host of other reasons. And as a result, everybody went home with this tuberculosis strand, and there was an epidemic spread in this community, and multiple people died because of it. So the building itself was the catalyst for that to happen. Was it properly ventilated? There was chances that these people will not have died. They will not have contracted this. But the building facilitated that transmission itself. So you can also point to where mistakes were made and the outcomes that are undesirable, unfortunately. So with these two things, we started working on this hospital project, the Butaro the Butaro Hospital, Butaro District Hospital. And in designing it, we were very much inspired by all the things that we've learned. The two I showed here today were the examples of how we just investigated the entire spectrum from all the way from bad to all the way from good. And our aim was to try to find how many more opportunities can we create for this to yield positive health outcome. Similar to Dr. Paul Farmer and Agnes Vinagwaho, we wanted to understand what you're trying to do. What is our mission? And we did that in the form of a question. Can this hospital be a model that creates more positive outcomes? So the things in Rwanda, we have a very good climate. The temperature difference throughout the year does not exceed 12 degrees Celsius from the hottest to the coldest, depending on where you are. So a lot of things that we're afraid of in terms of natural ventilation, we could get rid of hallways that are not ventilated, put everything outside, because we can spend the majority of the time outside. So the campus is on top of a hill, and all the circulation is in a courtyard, around the courtyard. The Nightingale Ward, yes, it was fantastic. She recommended that 500 years ago. But how do we improve on that? What are the other scientific studies that have emerged recently that can inform how we might make improvements to that? Similar to how Florence Nightingale done it. So one of the things that we found out was that it's scientifically proven that patients do not get well fast enough if they are staring at other sick patients. So the Nightingale Ward was fantastic because it solved one problem, but there have been research that came after that found out like other things that we had to consider into our ward. So even though you could not, move away from the general ward entirely and go to all private rooms for financial reasons, but what is the minimum improvement can we make on this? So the decision of flipping the bed so like people have a fantastic view outside, like, from across the mountains or inside the courtyard came from this understanding, like you want people to have a better view when they wake up and not like seeing someone else like agonizing across the room, because that like prevents you physically from like wanting to heal faster than you should. And these are decisions that we architects and designers have power to do all the time. Like we draw this in AutoCAD like without even thinking about it. But with intentionality, we can create like change in the life of the patient who's going to spend time here at some point of their lives. And like if the hospital is going to be here for, I don't know, 50 years, there'll be hundreds of thousands of people that are going to go through this ward. So you want to make that slight change into their lives. Where we place the windows, of course, if you put a bed, you can put a window. Like we make these decisions like, all the time, but we have to be intentional and not just to make it because we like symmetry or we want everything to be equal and well spaced, like those things that architects will get, hang upon because we like them that way, but like because we think they have a function they want to achieve. The hospital went on to become a little bit famous. It was featured in the New York Times because of some of the simple things, like the colors you see in the wards is that because clearly like we believe in good architecture. Like a project must have like a very good color palette, of course. Like it should be beautiful. Beauty is very important. But when you're working in an area where like people are illiterate, sometimes you want to make sure that they can easily navigate the space. So the choice of the colors was based on these very simple colors that are very easy to say in our language and everything else, so that when you match the signage across the campus, you can direct people using a color. You can follow the yellow, should go into the pediatrics. And they will just follow the signs that has a yellow sign until they get to like a place where there's like this big yellow color. Then they'll know that's where they're going. So the entire campus is kind of like color coded that way to allow people to do that. The photo on the announcement I saw on this door has Ilima Primary School on it. That's a project we built in the Congo that I'll not talk about today, but I wanted to bring it up because where we built it, there was no formal trade of construction. So we had to think really hard about how we're going to explain people to build those trusses, those wood trusses. And we color coded our entire CD set so that when we work on site, you can tell people like you cut the yellows, you cut the reds, you cut the black ones. And they will know like which one they just have to cut, and they just keep cutting it. And then the people assembling it, you explain to them, okay, put the black here, the yellow here, the orange, because they can't read the CD set. But as when you go to school, we are taught to produce CD sets. And you're working with this army of people who are very capable of doing things, but they don't understand the language that you're talking about. So we'll talk about architecture, the translation powers of architecture later. Infection control, of course, something that we had learned, like we had to figure out a way of building infection control itself into the facility. Again, we were lucky, we're on top of the hill. Rwanda is called a country of 1,000 hills, like it's hills everywhere. The hospital is on top, and naturally when the air rises, it gets hot, it rises, and it creates these nice breezes that always go like above the mountains. So we wanted to take advantage of that and like make sure like the clinical spaces are on, the ones that are above, because we are aiming to achieve 12 air changes per hour recommended by the World Health Organization as the minimum you should have to minimize the risks of nosocomial diseases. And then put all the administrative functions lower and outside, have access outside, because there are people that come to the hospital every day to work there who are not patients and don't work in clinical services, like accountants and people in procurement and things like that. Like you need to separate their day-to-day route from the people that are there for clinical reasons. Of course, it's much more complicated. The other things like maternity service, which is not really like a clinical service, but sometimes can be a clinical services depending on circumstances, like how do you deal with those and people that come in or emergencies and stuff like that. So the entire hospital master plan was thought as if a hospital is not one thing, it's not one typology of thing, but like an amalgamation of like a number of services that have very different needs. This is the hospital, and it was completed in 2011, built on top of the hill. The other thing was that how to build it in this region, which was one of the poorest districts in the country. Well, it could have been easier for us to just get a contractor from China or Turkey or from Europe or from the US to come, bring out the materials, machinery, built it and finished it. But Dr. Paul Farmer and Professor Agnes Vinagwaho, they said, absolutely not. Like, you need to figure out how to work with this population, because they believe that economic activity is one of the leading causes of preventive healthcare, where people don't get sick when they're well enough. People have enough good food that have all the nutrients that they need, they will fall sick less. Therefore, they believe in that economic investment. So again, we figured out like materiality. This is the volcanic rock on the walls that is, very available. You can pick them up from anywhere. It's actually like in the way of farmers if they want to work their land. So they pick it up, have like these dry stark walls like you see all over that country. And for a functional reason, we also needed thermal walls because it's up in the mountains close to the Volcano National Park. At night it gets cold a little bit. So you want like something that will absorb the heat during the day and radiate it like in the middle of the night. And so kill two birds with one stone, literally. So, but in the process of figuring out how to use that stone and use it nice, create the beauty of architecture and from this materiality that we had discovered, we also discovered like something exceptional, people's talents and like the potential for people to learn these things and like make it their own. The gentleman on the screen, his name is Achiza. He was very young when we were doing the hospital. He was a farmer before. He had never, constructed anything of sort. So we went through this process of like building mock-ups to try to figure out how we're going to do this stone cladding on the hospital project. And he emerged like this sponge that just absorbed like the things we were trying to create there. It became really good at like chiseling the stone and like creating like a very seamless wall. To date, 12 years later, he's still doing this work. So him and his friends have created these cooperatives and companies, and they're building like, this volcanic rendering wall like all over the country. It's not just in the north, like it's everywhere. So like we started like understanding like there is something really useful to try to figure out how architecture can tap into all of these processes. Because like, have we not done this? Have we not committed to investigating how to build this hospital beautifully with these people? We would not have met Hachiza. We would have like gotten like someone else to come and do it, and we'll just only be talking to those general contractors. We'll never have spoken to him or spent time with him trying to figure these things out. So when the hospital finished, we went on to help the Ministry of Health now like rethink the entire policy of district hospitals. Like, how do we bake these lessons that we had learned while we were putting Butaro up into policies, so that when they built hospitals, other ones like after Butaro, how do they going to read this DNA from the Butaro hospital and be able to be applied? So we investigated everything from like program agencies, sizes, minimum distances, all of these sort of things that you would, normally like have in a big book, but you try to simplify them. And then we went on to work with the Ministry of Health now to implement two other projects that, again, were to be able to be like the next iteration of Butaro Hospital. One being a rural area hospital. This is Muni District Hospital. It's built in the south of the country in a very different context than Butaro, very different site, much more steeper, but like still achieves the same type of like basic principles of how you build infection control into the facility, how you make the program adjacencies in the ways that make sense in the particular socio-economic context of Rwanda. And then we also designed and finished this in Nyarugenge District Hospital. So this is the urban site. This is in the middle of the city of Kigali, which was completed in the middle of COVID and immediately became the National COVID Treatment Center because it was designed to minimize infections and be able to deal with such pandemics. It was unfortunate for us to get that compliment that way, but we still feel like it was really a success that the Ministry of Health recognized that if you build this way and you have this problem, this is the only tool that you can rely on to be able to help you achieve it. So that's it. That was like a very big form of validation for us to be able to see that. Unfortunately, we would have liked it in another form that does not involve like people getting sick and potentially dying, but So at the end of it, when we've analyzed this work we've done in healthcare and everything else, we had like kind of like narrowed our philosophy down to this idea of like, we should use architecture to contribute to better or positive outcomes. It's the only way, because like not doing that is actually hurting our communities in our quests to improve our lives. And this is our mission statement as written on our website. I don't like to read mission statements because usually they're like these dry statements, but I want to explain to you where the origins of this came from so that, when you read it, you can see all of that context and what lessons we've learned that have brought us to this statement. So at the end of that, that line of work of like where we started from, like the lessons we've learned from healthcare facilities, we were certain that buildings can heal. It was no longer a point of inquiry for us. It was no longer a question on our mind. We were sure that buildings can heal. And in our practice, we started to investigate, okay, if we know buildings can heal, how much more can it heal? Because we just said in healthcare, like, it's possible if you have the political will, you have the right partner, you have the right thinking, you have the right ambitions, you have all the right, what, you can heal. You can create different avenues of creating opportunities for healing. So what else can we apply it to? I'll speak through a couple of projects that we believe architecture not only can heal, but we argue that we should contribute in healing. I'll start with social epidemics, things that we like to leave to politicians to politicize, to like the people working in that particular area to deal with, and talking about, opioids, gun violence is what I'm going to talk about, racism, like anything that you think exists to erode the cohesion of society. You can call it a social epidemic, especially if it starts like taking on like different proportions, fascism, whatever it is, like you name it, right? So in the United States, they have this big issue that none of us in the rest of the world understand how they relate to guns. Unfortunately, the thing that that does not become very apparent in the day-to-day debate are the victims of this gun violence. When they do, it's statistics, it's numbers. That might be shocking because statistics can be shocking. It's fine like to read numbers and say, what? 700 estimated gun death per week. I mean, like it's insane to think about it as a number, as a figure, right? And like the number of people that have actually this relationship to a gun that, none of us, like most of us outside of the United States world, like don't have that relationship to like these devices. But when we started working with these ladies, they lead an organization called Purpose Over Pain. They they visited the National Memorial to Peace and Justice, another project that I'll talk about later, and they asked us like a question, a very simple question. How do you humanize statistics? And I think they're not the only ones trying to do this. There are numbers of ways that people have done this before. Like people have made films and interviews, and people have come and talked to people in person and be able to relate those statistics to people. But architecturally, how do we help them achieve this? So in working on this project, we were basically confronted with these ideas like, how do you personalize statistics? So what we did was to first take off our architect's hat and not like start drawing plans and tell them how it can be done from this angle and that angle and all of those things first. So we took that off first. We say, we want to listen, we want to hear what it is that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Because without that dialogue, we will never know how to personalize those people. We'll never know the opportunity, where it lies to be able to personalize them. So we spoke with like hundreds of people that are members of these groups that have family members, very close ones, very loved ones that have been victims of gun violence. Thousands and thousands of conversation. And then in the end, it became apparent from every conversation that all these people kept objects from these victims, that for them reminded them the humanity of that person, of who they were before they died. Then you ask the question, would you be open to share maybe one or few of those objects that you've kept? Because the mothers will very outright tell you, like, I've kept my son's room exactly the way it is, or the way he left it. Like, even the bed is undone. Like, I don't want to touch it. Because for them, they refuse to believe that the son is gone. It's not going to coming home. Even though they know that the son is dead and they buried them. But like, they want to believe that that's their space and they're there and they're happy that it stays the way it is. So we started like, inquiring, like, could you donate that? So like, we can figure out what to do with it, but like, that is going to be our opportunity, our aperture to come in and humanize this person. And then they said yes. And then we designed a process in which we're going to collect this. Of course, as the United States, you have to sign a lot of agreements to make sure you don't get sued later on. The lengthy process we went through, we collected like people that might come and want to do it. And then they come up with this concept of 700 is a lot. And we thought we could, for each object, we will create a brick. And then with 700 of them, which is estimated fatalities per week, we're going to create a small house built with these bricks. And each brick will have an item that comes from a very different person that tells a very different story of what the victim was. And that's what we did, accompanied by photos, of course. Anything that they could give to us, we just started putting them into those houses. Each house is supposed to be 700 bricks. It does two functions. One is that it brings you into a space where you are confined to these stories. Like wherever you look, you'll see something. So like it immerses you into these stories. Like it completely immerses you in them. The other one is that it suggests to you the idea that if nothing is done on this problem, these little houses are going to continue growing and growing and growing and growing, like at the point where they'll be everywhere. And nobody wants to see that. Where like these little houses with like beautiful people's faces in it who are no longer with us because they were victims to gun violence. It was exhibited at the Chicago Biennale 2 years ago. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, but it's exhibited in the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. If you happen to be there, do visit. I think it's on until maybe January. I don't remember exactly. But even if it's no longer there, we're going to figure out a way of like continuing to exhibit it whenever we have an opportunity. One of the wishes we have is to make it a permanent and growing exhibition in Washington, D.C. To force politicians to recognize that this is an issue and hopefully be able to do something about it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is trauma. trying to go a little bit faster. This is the National Memorial to Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. It celebrates the lives and unfortunate deaths of thousands and thousands of people by lynching in the American South, in the past in the US. And it asks this question about what it is about architecture and memory work that can help us as a community start having difficult conversations about our pasts. And the US has a very unique and different situation to Rwanda, where in Rwanda we were like, okay, we didn't, we didn't do this properly, and we need to come to terms with our past, and we're going to honestly engage in the process of peace and reconciliation. It's still an experiment. We do hope it works because it's our future. That's what it rests on. We've invested a lot of time, a lot of energy into making it happen. But we hope that process is going to be successful and is going to yield a better society for our children and our grandchildren. In the US, it doesn't seem the same way, where people are willing to confront the history of what has happened. It's still a very big political debate to date. So when we were talking about it, like we recognize that the work we're doing was very different from the work we're doing in Rwanda, but we understood the values of what has happened in Rwanda and what could inform how this conversation can be had in the United States. Not to building up onto this kind of like division politics that exists in the US, where like people have to choose camps, but how do you bring someone in, whether they're on this side of the story or on that side of the story, and make them engage with the issue in the reality? So we came up with this empathy arc in which you first identify yourself as human, not as Republican, not as Democrat, not as from the South, not from the North, like who are you as a person? So the project has these columns that are shaped to the average size of a human. So you can relate to it. As you can say, this could be me as a person. Like you can relate to it on a scale basis. And then the next stage is now to bring you into a little bit uncomfortable situation in which you need to understand that the issue is not simple. Like you need to step out of your comfort zone to engage properly with it. And then be proximate is where now you engage with the issue directly. While you're mentally prepared that it's not easy, it's going to be difficult, but you have to engage with it. You have to feel the weight of the issue while you're in that discomfort zone. And then the second one is now to change the narrative. That, it wasn't okay for me to be okay without knowing all of these sort of things. But now I know. And it infuses you with the right information. And then the last one, of course, it has to rebuild the hopefulness in you. Because if it leaves you in the dark place, and then it hasn't really completed the cycle of like recruiting you into committing to participate in a conversation that makes our lives better next time. So that's basically like how the project is designed. You begin from a place in which you identify yourself to the issue. So that column is what you see at eye level, and it's approximately your size. And as you move in, you start sinking on the ground. This is how you approach it. You can see the name. It's very clearly on the marker. You can see the county. You can see the name and the date where it's applicable and people have died. And as you move in, you start sinking, and then you can see those things hanging above you, and then start evoking that idea. I was like, these people were lynched by hanging, which was the most preferred method of these executions, unfortunately. And when you get to the third stage, that's when like now you start realizing what the issue is, or the scale of the issue, in which you can see almost all of them hanging above your head as individuals. That's when you start really understanding the scale and the weight that this topic has on some members of this community, that maybe you happen not to be one, but you should really think about it. But also this is a place of reflection. That's where you sit and you let like all of that discomfort sink in. There's a little water to kind of like calm the atmosphere, to give that sense of moment of pause and reflection and think about it. And then the last stage is now you emerge from this like weight being like on top of you to now like a position in the middle ground where you're above it, where you can see not only the museum itself, but also like beyond the city. This point in Montgomery, Alabama is the highest point above the courthouse and the church house, which are two institutions that have supported and allowed this culture to proliferate and justified it, using the Bible, using the laws of like those sort of weird things. And that's an idea of like, it's possible for us to surmount these, mistakes of the past and be a better society next time. Beyond that, in the garden of this, the memorial, there is an exact replica of all the columns inside the memorial. All the columns have a direct replica outside. And the purpose of those is that to prove that the communities are now beginning to be ready to receive or having this conversation, is that counties that have these replicas with their name on it will go through the political process of claiming it and installing it in their county, preferably in a public place, where they will recognize this past and history, and they'll say, we're now ready to have a conversation that allows us to heal and move forward. The hope is that all of these will be claimed and taken away, and this landscape would also flourish, will grow, and represent this new growth, this new birth that says like, it's possible to grow and become more healthier if only we take this step back and confront unfortunate event of our history. If you happen to be in Montgomery, Alabama, do visit the project. I don't have the statistics about how many counties have already gone through the process of claiming their columns. I heard it had started, but I'm sure it's going to be a lengthy process. But yeah, I think it's a very good and powerful project. And then again, coming back to this participation of people, how do we make, all of us participate in this process? Part of the eco-justice initiatives memorial work, there is also, beyond the memorial, the National Memorial to Peace and Justice, there is also a legacy museum in which they want to exhibit the work that they've done in the past, 30, 40 years to prove that slavery hasn't ended, but it changed the form, because they say it's from slavery to mass incarceration. And part of the Legacy Museum was to try to figure out a way of like, again, painting a picture of like these victims, even though you see them as names, they were not just all the same people. There were a plethora of characters and ambitions and dreams and some were not very good people, like, let's be honest, but they didn't deserve what happened. But like that differentiate in characters is like something that does not come when we use the same font to write every name and same size and everything else, because we reduce them to just that format. Right? So part of the things that EJI organized, which we thought was really, really very thoughtful, is this soil collection exercises, in which like all the families that could identify these people names to be in their lineage would participate in this event, in which they go to the site where this person was murdered, if it's known, and they will collect the soil of that particular place and put it in a jar, which will be exhibited with their name on it. And like it will start creating like this plethora of like different browns of the colors that kind of like differentiate further like what these people are and what the tragic end of their lives are. So this is what like the soil collection, wall looks like. Even from the colors of like and shades and of the soil, you can see like it's very different. Then I'm going to talk about hopelessness, the idea that architecture can contribute in helping heal hopelessness. This is Fred Swanecker, he started Africa Leadership University, a university that is trying to like innovate around higher education in Africa. Let's say this quote that they ask students to declare a mission for their lives and not a major for university. The reason why he says that is because that population growth that I mentioned earlier, not only there's no infrastructure to accommodate the incoming population, there is not enough infrastructure right now to accommodate the current population, especially for higher learning institutions. Fred Swanica uses this sentence. He says, for Africa to be able to accommodate all the young people that have to go through university by 2050, we'll have to build something, don't quote me on this, but he said like 135 universities the size of Harvard around every week or every month to be able to accommodate that population. That's an impossible task to be able to achieve that. So through Africa Leadership University, they are trying to do two things. One is to solve the spatial needs for higher education, to be able to deploy it faster and at affordable capital investment. And the second one is to change the model of education itself, because they say the purpose of higher education is to get people ready to tackle the challenges our society faces. It's good to also go to school and investigate, problems that, go very deep, be a philosopher, like be a researcher and like really master that. It's also a need. It's not to say that's not needed, but in Africa, more and more need is more focused on solving the challenges we have now. Practical solutions. So they're trying to do two things at the same time because of the challenge that I just described. When we worked with them, we designed the Africa Leadership University campus. This is in Kigali, it's in Rwanda. And they came to us with this challenge. How do we build these universities? But we can't afford to build like Harvard-sized universities every week to be able to get all these students that need all of this work. But also like, how do you design now that campus to accommodate our specific innovative way of higher learning and education? They have this belief of what stages a person should go through to be able to achieve what they say should achieve. One is discovery. The first step is like, you need to figure out what you want to do. I think they've like outlined like 7 global challenges that include like poverty, climate change, entrepreneurship, things like that. So there's like, these are 7 like things that we can help you figure out. What do you want to do? So you need to discover where your passion is, what you want to do. Then the second one is individual learning. What are the lessons that are very specific to you as a person that you want to carry into this education? What more do you want to take on before? What do you need to know before you begin this journey with us? Then the third one is peer learning. They believe that people absorb more information from people they relate to faster than like some random person that they don't really have like an individual connection. And that's an opportunity to be able to help one another to reach the goals people want to reach as fast as they can. And then they believe that as much as individuals, we can figure things out with technology and sort of things, guided learning is still very important, because most importantly, it allows people to avoid mistakes other people have already committed. They'll be dealing with young people that are zealous and wants to change the world like overnight, like we all did when we were at university. So they want to figure out a way of where like people can still tell them like, yes, you have very good thinking, but beware, don't do this, because as we did it and it cost us X amount of money, X amount of time in solving our solution. So they can avoid such inefficiencies. So they don't discard guided learning as well. So that's how we started designing the building based on that, this pod idea that allows to have like journeys of self-discoveries amongst them. And then like the pods become either opportunities for individual learning or peer learning. And then like the spaces between the pods can also be reconfigured to be able to accommodate, facilitate the learning as they say it. And as we started working through more practical things, then like we form a grid so that our structural engineers do not get very mad at us for thinking about crazy things that can't be built. Then we started like figuring out like how different needs can be accommodated with this very, very simple modular modular and regular system. But also like how they start like serving different purposes, not just like for that learning, because a building needs, you know, traffic areas, you need service areas, you need plumbing, you need all sorts of things. And then also like understanding how to size it, when to know when it has become too big. So again, leaning on to like research that's been done by sociologists. In this instance, we reference Dunbar's 150 people group of cohesive group that when you go above it, you can't really form meaningful connections and eventually the group will die. So like that's the cap, that's the biggest space you will get in this building. And then you started like laying it down on this carpet. Like I said, Rwanda is the country of 1,000 hills. So everywhere you have slopes, some greater than others. They have a like relatively high slope. And then that's how just the building just sits on it in a way that, again, in every place, you can get natural light and you can get natural ventilation because those are very easy things to achieve when you're building in the country. This was towards the end of construction. Just a couple of photos of what it looks like. I refer to this building as a campus in a building because no space is similar to another one. Like all of them, like they keep changing. It is the food court in the public commons. So it looks at night, and the brick all like come from Rwanda. Like it's made by these cooperatives that have been trained on how to create systems of producing fired clay bricks sustainably, using coffee husks to fire them, getting clay in ways that does not destroy the wetlands and everything else. And because it was a countrywide program that is supported by the government, we said it's important that these people that have been mandated by the nation to do things sustainably tap into this growing market of institutional projects that are happening in the country. So we are able as architects to valorize their product and be able to say, you know, because the challenge in most of our places is that people do things to survive, not because they're bad, not because they're bad people. You know, if they're firing these bricks unsustainably, it's because they want to make the price as cheap as possible, because the market that is demanding it can't afford to pay for better bricks. And then institutional projects go to China and Turkey and everywhere else to get materials to build, which again like defeats the purpose of asking people to invest in sustainable processes to produce materials. So we're trying to basically like demonstrate like it's possible for institutional projects, yes, to be appealing and be international standards, and yet use these materials produced locally because the economy has to balance somehow. The next project I'm going to talk about originates from a country not very far from here, from Sweden. It's with a group called Norsken. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. There's anyone from there, don't be mad at me. So they invest in entrepreneurs. They believe that entrepreneurs are our best bet in solving these problems. And because of that, they want to support them, give them the ecosystem they need, give them the knowledge they need, give them the support they need so they can be successful in helping us achieve these problems. Am I going way over time? Okay. Bear with me, guys. 15 more minutes. I promise I'll be done. So when they thought about the expansion in East Africa, I mean, this was their first expansion out of Sweden, by the way. So we convinced them that Rwanda was the right place for them to come. And then we needed to figure out how to translate architecturally the ideas that have worked so well in Sweden into Rwanda, which was a very big challenge for us because we don't believe in and transplanting solutions. Like a project that you've built and functions well here in Copenhagen will not work in Kigali, I can tell you that right now. We'll put it there, it'll look good and we'll inhabit it. But at the end of, I don't know, 50 years, 150 years, it will not square very well, for a whole host of reasons. So we needed to go through this process of understanding what it is that they do, they care about, and then think through architecture and design, how to translate that into the contexts in which we operate. So we understand that Norsken or Norwen, however you read that, it means Northern Lights in Sweden. And for them, that's like pride of the nation. It's very contextual to where they are. And again, it reflects what they do. It's like they believe these entrepreneurs are like the Northern Lights. They're the rock stars. They're the people that we should follow and support them and push them to help us come up with these solutions. In East Africa, when you look at our sky, you do not see Northern Lights. We don't have any of those things. But we do have a constellation of stars, which is not very far from these rock stars that they talk about. If they believe that, these are people that we should look up to and be able to support, we should do the same in terms of like creating a constellation of these stars to be able to provide those solutions. So that's the kind of like overarching, like philosophical translation that we could come up with this concept of what Norsken is trying to do. So beyond that, how do we develop that concept in a way that becomes a project? Like the programmatic diagram of this project, what would that look like in creating a constellation so that we can figure out how to start making it a project? They have a philosophy that they don't build new buildings. Like us, they also believe that the more sustainable building is the one that is already existing. So there's no need to create a new one. You can just take an existing building, you layer these pasts with the new, and you'll be able to move forward from there with both kind of like historical layers and future layers together, like merged together. So they acquired an existing primary school, which was like downtown, but has overgrown its space. And the city of Kigali asked them to move out and go find a more appropriate space. Rwanda was colonized by Belgium in the early 1800s and until like 1960. During that time, the Belgian governors established this school. It was very exclusive to the Belgian governors and of course like the elites of the Kigali that worked in offices, but for the children it was a very expensive school. So the idea of opening this campus up for all entrepreneurs from East Africa to come in and figure out solutions for the country and beyond was very appealing to the Norsken Foundation. And I think philosophically it carries like a lot of more meaning on this particular site. So they acquired this was a primary and secondary school. And we basically like had 3 interventions on this site. Because the capacity of the classrooms wasn't enough, we had to expand it. So we had like a new building so we can reach the total square meters that we needed to accommodate these entrepreneurs. We need to renovate the classrooms that were existing so they can serve this constellation of working spaces and different experiences as well. And the spaces in between schools had to also have a functional value in this entire ecosystem. Again, we looked at what it is the space that are going to allow us to make these people work better and be productive. Can we go to social sciences and figure out what are the lessons can we learn from what they've discovered in their work that we can lean on in creating and shaping these spaces? So that's what we did. We investigated that. And then we looked at, how the buildings should perform. When we talk about sustainability, we need to reduce it down to very simple things that we understand. What is it going to be the form that is, not like very foreign to this site that we're intervening in? And how is it going to serve the purpose of this constellation you're creating? How is it going to function? How does the building function? It's very important. And of course, how do we put it together? Like, what materials is it made of and not made of? And what is their function? That was the rendering that we came up with when we finished the project. All the programmatic arrangement, again, have to reference back to that idea of constellation. So we had to figure out of like getting way of like these double corridor, like linear type of spaces, the drawings. Yes, and then they insist on this thing, like they want to create a world that is good for people and planet. So everything in this building, they've programmed it to be zero wastes and to be able to generate the energy that they use. Unfortunately, they don't generate their own water yet. They're still into the city main, but hopefully they'll find a solution to that as well. But they do use like really systems that like minimize a lot of water use. The material palette, again, like familiarity of the place, like where does this building come from and what is it built with? That's very important to us. And then how much materials can we recycle from things that are going to be able to destroy here and there as we make these site functions. It's a section through the classrooms after they've been retrofitted, then made ready for use. I'll just flip through this. These are like renderings we created. This is a photo of like the finished houses. This is the extension. This is the addition. It was completed 2 weeks ago, but the classroom was completed. The classroom's renovation was completed last year and has been in use ever since. So an aerial view of what it looks like now. We love the fact that they had like these big trees. So like when you leave the busy part of the city and you enter it, it's a completely different ecosystem and microclimate of its own. So we preserved all the trees. We told the contractor not to cut any tree unless we give them explicit permission to do so. Yeah, this is the new extension building. Everything is designed with like local materials in mind as much as we can, like the furniture, like all of that is fabricated in Rwanda as much as we could make it. And it's been good to see people using it as as we had envisioned in like in these different type of spaces, both in like inside and outside. So this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, how architecture can help heal planetary ecosystems. I think we all talk about sustainability, so I will not dwell on this too much. I think like we all have been studying how we could do that better. This is a project we did for the Diane Gorilla Fossey Fund. It was started by this lady, Diane Fossey. She came to live in East Africa, Central Africa, like in the 50s, I think. And she lived her entire life there. She was killed there in the 80s. But she had this idea that, once we understand the value of life, then we can only start caring for it. And she lived her life that way. She said, I'm going to leave everything in the United States. I'm going to go to live with these mountain gorillas in the Virunga National Park. So when we were working with the Diana Gorilla Fossey Fund, we, basically they were telling us how do we stop that? How do we stop this? I don't know if you can understand what this image is representing. On the left is the Mount Volcano National Park, and the right is the human habitat. And those are like agriculture plot. It looks like the photo is pixelated a little bit, but this is where we grow our food, and that's where gorillas and the other animals in the Virunga National Park live. So clearly, this is not going to work because this means that we only care about our lives. We only care about feeding ourselves and our children, and everything living on the left side needs to mend for itself. So that is not how we achieve this balance. So in the mission for this project for us is how do we make everybody an activist for this, for conserving the environment? How do you do that? How do you support that mission from an architecture standpoint? How do you make those people achieve their livelihoods, but still not destroy the ecosystem that these chimpanzees really need? So from an architecture standpoint, obviously we have to be inspired by that natural environment that we say we're protecting. So understanding it like tall trees and canopies of branches and leaves above. And that's basically how like the whole concept of like the building came in. You say that you're gonna be like this, like tiny columns that like it box the forest, and then it's gonna be this canopy that have like this type of like different types um of height. That's a section of the finished rendering. You'll notice that we decided to have a green roof on this. First, because if we claim to be the people trying to protect this natural habitat, we need to figure out a way of like making the buildings the less important thing on that site. Like our buildings should be anchored into the ground and not seen, and then have this ecosystem that we say to protect, rejuvenate above, around and above the building. It's all of them. When we were talking with them, we realized that they sit on an amount of knowledge that they think for them is scientific research, but those actually like the valid instruments that will allow people to become activists if only they knew and could understand that work. Because for them, it looked like data and day-to-day work, but like it was very important that average person comes into this place and be able to interact with that work and understand the value of it. So we worked with them to design an entire exhibition around their work, its history, what they do now, and why everybody should care, and why it's important for everyone to care. That's the landscape that we've designed. Every inch of this site has been redesigned to become exactly like the environment of the National Volcanic Park before humans interfered. So every tree that was chosen because it's a native species that is born there, and that when fully grown is going to become like a natural gorilla habitat. So when you go there as a person, you can actually understand what it is supposed to be and look like, but also like allow the Diana Gorilla Fossil Fund to start working in that place. So this is what it looks like. Also, all of that is supposed to become an expansion of the National Gorilla, National Virunga Park. From there, that's the volcano. You can see the park. It's very dense up there, but all of this is like human settlement. If you do happen to be in Rwanda, do visit. Again, built from like the same material that you again find in that area. It's like the building is here, but it's born from the materials that you find there. Then the last project is the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, designed to, or thought as an institution that should figure out how to grow food again without destroying the environment. Because that first image I showed you, we're not going to stop the quest to feeding ourselves as a species, humans, clearly, but how do we do that better? This is the challenge. This is the land transformation of the country. This was in 90s in the country. The white color is the farmland that was estimated in terms of number of hectares, but also like mapped around the country. And this would be 35 years later. You can see how much farmland we are claiming because the population growth, again, and the need to be food secure. So one of the biggest challenges is like, how do you solve this issue? Because if you continue this way, clearly it's not sustainable because the border of the countries are not growing. So when imagining this campus from a master plan level, the way it's laid out this way is because if you go around the countryside in Rwanda, it's actually like more or less the same similar way where people live. So the understanding of like access to the communities and how they are, but also like how people live as sections that cut through the mountain from the top, going all the way down to the valleys where the water is. So that sounds to be like the more like organic ways of like dividing land in the country. It's not always the same exact rule, but that's the general part of it. So we wanted to figure out a way of like providing an environment that mimics the living conditions and land allocation that are prevalent in that particular area, so that if in this institution they can figure out how to grow enough food in this configuration, then it's applicable to the majority of the country. The last thing you want to do is monoculture on hundreds and thousands of hectares of land, because that hasn't worked for many other countries. The United States, not to mention names, but they're reversing their steps back from that. And then the other thing that it does is it needs to generate its own electricity. So they have a 3.6 megawatt solar power plant that generates the electricity. It needs to utilize water that comes from here. So it near a lake, all the water that it uses come from the lake, gets treated, gets used, gets treated, and back into the waterbed. It has to produce zero waste. So everything that they use on campus and how they manage it and how they treat it is kind of used in a way that it can circulate and be able to be reused or completely recycled offsite. Then from a construction standpoint, from the institution's mission, which is to create a conservation agriculture, clearly we were tasked with producing architecture that is as conservative as possible. How do we build this entire campus of 69 buildings with the minimum impact on the carbon emissions possible? So we had to rethink basically how we're going to achieve that. And we lean on this concept of One Health. If you're not very familiar with it, it's a concept that has been, again, mentioned more and more lately, that we need to figure out a way of achieving this balance between humans' ecological life and animal life, because our survival is intrinsically linked. Therefore, tipping the balance in one side definitely going to mean that we are tipping the balance way too far. So we try to focus on the embodied carbon, and we used soil. We thought about soil, using soil for construction, as much soil as we can, because it's available material, has low carbon. And as I said this morning, people have built with earth way before architecture even was called a discipline, or people called architects existed. So we wanted to go back to the roots and figure out what lessons can we learn from that we can apply to here. Clearly the goals, we talk about cutting our emissions in half and being neutral by 2030. All of these jargon words we use, we need to distill it down to understanding where does the current emissions come from. And when we were doing RICA, we investigated this issue about when we do build according to the materials we find on the market, the skills, the construction technology that we are all accustomed to, what it is that we are talking about. Then we put a figure to it. And then we say, now we're going to put another figure here, and then we aim to push this down as much as possible. And then what do we fill this lower bottom with? That was our mission, to try to reduce this as much as possible. So we investigate and figure out where these are located, where this number is located, and then we will go and find alternatives that pushes that figure down as much as we could. So the entire campus buildings were thought in these ways, all the way from the buildings themselves to the smallest scale possible, the lamp shade that we have in here. Where does it come from? What is it made of? The table that is in the building, where does it come from? What is it made of? The chair we sit on or the table, where does it come from? What is it made of? And how much embodied carbon is? What we were targeting was to have a campus that will become climate positive the time it opens and start operations. Hopefully we'll meet that target, but we really wanted to achieve that. These are the buildings when finished. We invested a lot into timber construction. Unfortunately, we don't have a timber industry like you guys have here that you've mastered for thousands of years, as we haven't built with timber the way that is advanced to the level of institutional requirements that we have now. Before, it was just used as a very organic materials that was recycled every 4 seasons or something like that. So how do you invest in the supply chain in a way that now we can start using wood for institutional projects and standards required by the global development? We invested a lot in understanding earth. How do we build with earth? Again, with that idea of like, yes, we can achieve modernity and durability and those sort of things, but we can use materials that don't pollute. We don't have to rely on concrete blocks. Interestingly enough, back to the importance of having a system that promotes and want to innovate, we were able to have a conversation with the regulating authority in the country that had struggled to regulate earth construction, adobe blocks construction. And we said, well, we're doing, because we have this opportunity of this big project, we're doing a lot of research on earth. And we are more than happy to contribute in making guidelines that will allow you to instruct the general public how to build with earth sustainably and safely, most of all. We are in the Great Lakes region, very close to like highly seismic areas. So we have to design to very high seismic values. And the last thing you want is people to live in houses that might end up killing them if there is an earthquake one of these 2 days. So like, how do we start now like disseminating all this knowledge that we've learned, especially if the country wants to, especially if there's a political will to want to do that. These were gazetted 3 weeks ago, actually. So they are now in effect in Rwanda, and anyone can build with Adobe blocks in the country, which was a huge opportunity that added to us being able to complete RICA and having an opportunity to invest in this investigation of how to build sustainably with earth. Again, timber is like really, really a serious issue. Deforestation in Africa is causing chaos. Like, how do you encourage sustainable wood felling and timber processing and all sort of things? Yeah, I'll end on the photo. So these are some of the photos of like artisans that I've worked with, people that were engaged in crafts that produce products they sell to their local communities or to tourists for like $5-10. And we're saying like, if we want to be a middle income country, we need to make sure like people that possess these type of skills tap into these big markets of construction. In Rwanda, construction is probably like the third or second largest capital intensive industry in the country after agriculture and manufacturing, or probably before manufacturing, because of the type of growth we are witnessing at the moment. So if the people that possesses these like crafts and traditional skills are not able to access that market and be able to drive economic activities from them, there's a huge missing opportunity for people to gain livelihoods from these very lucrative businesses for contractors, not for architects. For architects, it's horrible. So like this guy, we call him the grandfather of clay works in the country. He loves working with clay. So he does this glazed clay products that we decided to turn into tiles. So some of these tiles came from Welars. His name is Welars. But before he was producing these pots that just people come and buy because they look really cool. That was it. Some of the photos of like rammed earths that we've used in natural colors, just sealed, and then the furniture again, like investing like in every aspect that we could, from like the largest scale to the smallest scale. This is the Africa Design Center. So this, we started as a fellowship in 2016. And the reason for that is because we recognize we won't live here forever. Mass cannot do all these projects in Africa, and we don't want to. So we need to figure out a way of like starting to broaden the network, especially like supporting young professionals when they come out of school, so they're able to at least understand what it takes to work and be able to get this work done and be able to do it themselves, or take it up, do it like we do, or better, like make improvements to it. So that type of like thing we're trying to figure out, like the transition from education to professional practice is one of those like very, very difficult moments that, in my opinion, discourages many young creative people, because it's a very brutal change of environment, of challenges, of lack of support. So we believe that by, sheltering them a little bit and giving them more smoother transition, they're able to keep that fire of innovation burning inside them and be able to do this a little bit more. I like to use this photo. I don't know if you can see. This is Tepo. He's from South Africa. He was at the African Design Center as a fellow. I met him when I had gone to speak at Design in Daba in 2016. So this is me speaking at Design in Daba, and I was talking about Hakiza. This is Hakiza that I showed earlier. And he understood what I was saying and came to meet me after the conference. And this is a photo after he's finished the African Design Center, talking about his work and mentioning how he met on the same stage. So for me, like, this photo kind of like represents this thing of like, I've done what I've done and I've tried to convince someone else to do it the way I do it or better than I do it, and they're doing it. And probably want to think like he spoke better than I at Design in Daba. So this is my last slide, and I'll stop boring you. But it's good to present all of this work and beautiful images. There's a lot of hard work that go behind this type of work, and we like to say that our actually most important, longest running project is our own practice, because we believe that currently the way the architecture practice and education is structured is unfit to do all of this sort of things. I think earlier we had a conversation with, we were talking about the economics of practicing architecture, which is horrible business from a profitability standpoint. So we need to figure out a way of investing in understanding how the practice of architecture should change, how we architects should change, how the education of architects should change to be able to deal with these issues. And that is the number one project that we're committed to invest in, that we've invested in, and that we want to continue investing in. I'll stop there, then we can have a conversation. Thank you.
Is this work? Yeah. Thank you so much, Christian, for a fantastic lecture. It was really inspiring to see you taking us all the way through the practice of MAS, but also through a lot of important discussions for all architects. I think so. It's coming from the detail of the brick to how we behave in society as professionals, in kind of a global context. It's really inspiring to see how you're leading this conversation, and we're very honored that you want to spend time here in Copenhagen with us and discuss these issues. I want to ask you a few questions, and then I think we'll ask the audience as well.
Okay.
But I think I want to start in a way where you're ending, but also where you started. You described how Africa is growing a lot. There's a doubling of the population in the next 30 years or something. It's increasing to the combined size of India and China, something like that. You have yourself mentioned a figure in some of your work of 700,000 housing units, for instance, needed. I made similar calculations saying if we take the 1.3 billion people, and we think that probably half of the houses have to be changed in the next 30 years. We need housing for 2 billion people. That is a lot, 2 billion people, something like that, plus minus. Plus we need schools and airports and hospitals and, how should we deal with this? It's like building a new United States every 4 years or something. It's really, the scope is massive, and when we talk about sustainability and the future of architecture and building, what do you think? What is your take on this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll give you my personal take on it because it's very different from my professional take.
Yes.
first, and then I give you my professional take. My personal take is that the solution to that problem is not building more or building a lot. Because I think at some point we are going to have a conversation as a global community about the ideals of lives we've set. And I like to say this, especially to younger architects and designers. It's not sustainable to live in a world where every young person's dream is to own a private house, a private jet, a private yacht, and like be a billionaire. Like it's the wrong ideal. And unfortunately, we've created a society in which every form of value has been translated into money for some reason. And for me, Africa right now is at a place where it's possible to reshape societal values that are not money, where like people feel valued and can contribute without being a billionaire. Someone earlier today like said something along the lines that they hope the term philanthropic donor would disappear. I hope so too. It's a ridiculous concept to think that you make billions and then you decide which good cause you give money to so they can, I mean, I hope my donors are not going to listen to this, but yeah, that's my personal take. I feel like we have an opportunity to have a conversation of reframing what values we want to create. And then from those values that have been reframed, now deduct the type of built environment we think can support that. And I highly doubt it's going to be the same thing as we've done in the past. I give people, again, this example. Should Africa invest in millions of kilometers of highway roads right now in 2022? If you ask me, I would say no. Like it makes no sense for us because it means we are basically creating like an extension of the market to the car industry that we are all globally in agreement that has not worked and it's causing more problems than solutions. Therefore, we need to figure out how to change that. But we are all busy trying to make a better Tesla, like a more functioning Tesla, like a cheaply made electrical car, that we don't realize that the car needs to be interrogated also as a concept itself. Like we need to question it, individual vehicles. What values they bring in our societies? Should we maintain that or should we change that? I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I mean, you could say that Africa is also, to a certain for instance, if you talk about mobile phones, for instance, yes, they have jumped one of the steps we took in Europe, for instance. You didn't have a huge infrastructure of wires, so you jumped technology.
Yes.
And that could be one question. You know, do you see similar possibilities in architecture for kind of jumping, yes, so to say, not making new roads, but taking a different path in, yes, construction, in architecture?
Yes, absolutely. So that's where I think there is a possibility to leapfrog,
yeah,
some of these things and be able to, I don't know, like come up with build spaces that serve a different purpose.
Yeah.
But we have to be intentional about what that other purpose is.
Yeah.
Should the school just be used as a school? Should it be used as a school and a community space and as, I don't know, a marriage center or a counseling center? Like what is a school? Like, you know, as we create it, as we design it. Now that's my professional opinion, is like, there's also like there's still a possibility, many possibilities to rethink the existing built space, how they are used, because not every spatial solution should result into a new building. They need to create like forms of efficiencies and ways that spaces can support that. But also like the new ones that we add should be able to perform multiple functions, tick as many boxes as possible.
Yeah.
Should we continue separating a hospital from a school, from a university, or like when you build one campus, it has everything. Like it can be like a small clinic for like the neighboring people, can be like, you know, like it can achieve multiple functions.
Yeah.
So that's the short-term solution, in my opinion, but we also need to continue questioning the long-term solutions.
Anybody from the audience who wants to ask a question? Otis?
Hi, thank you so much for that really inspiring presentation. I wanted to kind of cheekily pack 3 questions into one theme that you discussed right at the beginning, which was this idea, the importance of measuring impact. Yep. And I wondered if you could share with us some of your tools for measuring impact, how you managed to convince those that are going to pay for it to invest in those tools, and perhaps share a kind of story from your practice where the impact that you've assessed has made you reevaluate your initial standpoint.
Okay, so if I understand correctly your question, the first one is tools that we've used to measure the impact. The second one would be how we've convinced people to pay us to measure the impact. And the third one was some of the outcomes of what we've learned in the past. So starting with the first question, the tools don't exist. So we've created them before. We're still creating them, still refining them. We didn't have one tool to go to, but we relied a lot on tools that existed in other industries to be able to patch things together that we thought could give us both quantitative and qualitative data to be able to see if we could put some studies that allow us to understand the impact. So we used a lot of things, starting from measuring devices installed in the spaces. If we say we believe passive ventilation can achieve 12 air changes per hour in a ward, we had to measure that. So we'll go and find a device and do calculations and see, okay, if we can measure that, there's this 12 air changes per hour. This is how in healthcare they measure it. We'll go buy that thing and install it there so we can monitor that. If we say we believe, thermal walls are going to help maintain temperature between this and that, we'll go get a thermometer, install it so we can monitor and get the data. So things like that are very basic, we've got to. Then there are also other things that are not basic, but we've also had to figure out. One example I can give is the hospitality industry has gotten really good at capturing data about customer satisfaction. They have multiple tools of how they use it, surveys, things where you press a button when you exit a hotel room or a restaurant to rank the service you've gotten that day. They compare it from Monday to Friday to Sunday. So there's a whole host of things they've done so they can make more money. We took those tools because as we wanted to learn, because no one was paying us to do those things. I'll get to your last question about money, and used it to try and evaluate a project we did in Malawi, a maternity waiting village. So Malawi had this problem where a lot of mothers were dying during childbirth because they were not attended to, because they're in their villages and it's very remote. They are not trained professionals, and there are traditions about training. What do you call these mothers that assist other mothers or in
midwives?
Midwives.
Yeah.
So they have traditional ways of training midwives that will assist mothers conventionally. Those things got broken through the process of colonization, and therefore you don't have midwives and you don't have trained nurses to attend to these mothers. So because it's a young population, people get married very young and they don't have experience. So a lot of them suffer and die from unnecessary consequences, majority of which die on the way to try to reach a hospital because it's 5, 6, 10 kilometers away. So President Banda came up with this initiative called maternity waiting homes. That's where they will invest in community health workers who live in the communities. But those community health workers will make sure they refer any pregnancy they suspect of complications to this maternity waiting home. The maternity waiting home will be near a facility, a hospital, where they can be followed, make sure professionals can make sure that mother does not, or the child does not suffer or die from that complication. Now, when we approached that project, our challenge was not to design it in a way that that it's beautiful and it's functional. Of course, that was it. But the primary objective of it was that these mothers would be encouraged to spend time there. And they'll be encouraged to encourage other mothers in the villages to also come. Because if they come, they don't enjoy their time, or they don't like the facility, or they don't do whatever it is. They are less likely to come if they get pregnant again. And they're even less likely to ask another mother to come in to spend time at the facility. So our whole like architectural question was very different. And we pushed back really hard on doctors who wanted us to make it like a hospital ward. We were like, these mothers are not coming here to sleep on hospital beds the whole day. They are functioning people. They're not sick. They just have a pregnancy that has a high risk of complication, but they're functional. They will not be doing that if they're in their villages. They'll be up and about. So you have to design a space that allows them to maintain a level of sanity. Because otherwise they'll say, no, when I go there, they put me in a room and ask me to sleep the whole day. I don't want to go back there. Like, it needs to be a place where they can still go on about their lives, as socialize with other people, be able to like, you know, have like intimate spaces outside and like just hang out until like they get, you know, checked and everything else. So we refuse to make a ward like this big with like so many beds that have as many women as possible, which was the model the government was using before. So we had the control group of mothers that have gone to these other facilities that are like this big room with like a bed there, a bed here, a bed there, a bed here, then some beds inside, because for them, they want to fulfill a function, receiving as many mothers as possible. To ours, where we took, we called it, so if you look at the Malawi villages from above, flying, if you go to like rural areas, the occupiable space of the household is bigger outdoors than indoors. Like the houses are very tiny. People go in the houses when they go to sleep. Otherwise, like all the activities take place like outside. So you look at that, and then you look at the building you also have to create, and you say like the indoor spaces have to be small as possible. You go inside to sleep, period. And then like the bigger space is outside between the buildings. So you create this like very small unit of like 6 beds. Like when you enter it, like there's only 6 beds, you're going to sleep. But we arrange them in a way they start creating what we call a cluster. And then the cluster will create now like the entire campus as it continues to grow. And then for every 4 clusters, you have a toilet or bathroom, so that even if it can grow organically, whatever it is. So what we did was, we didn't convince people that to fund an impact tracking from an architecture standpoint, but we convinced a scientific funder to fund the research on how maternity waiting homes are improving mothers and babies' lives. And they paid us to do that. We had nurses on staff, we had researchers on staff, and they took the control group that went to these government model maternity waiting homes, and they took the group that went to the maternity waiting village that we designed. And then in addition to their questions, which were very scientifically oriented about, you know, health of the baby and health of the mother, we asked them to add this customer satisfaction evaluation on top of like the question they were asking, so that we can understand, have we achieved what we are said to achieve? Like, do these mothers committed? Are they committed to come back if they get a second pregnancy, or are they, you know, likely to invite somebody else? So we went through, and then of course the scientific researchers had their own results, but we also got the data and analysis and everything else that we got peer reviewed, and it was published in the Massachusetts nursing scientific journal or something like that. So that was our first kind of like attempt of like trying to measure like the impact of like an architecture intervention into.
It's really interesting. We'll take one more question from the
Sure.
audience, because I can see there was one, I can't see, but there was one here.
But does that answer a question though? I didn't ask. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My name is Pedro. I'm a student at Copenhagen Business School, but I work in an architecture office here in Copenhagen.
You said you're from business school.
Yeah, I am. But I
Nice.
studied here last year because it's a joint collaboration between the art school and the business school. I have a practical question, which is, in the beginning, you said that you invest in upstream practices. And I was just wondering if you do that only through architecture practices or if you have other means to do it. So, because from what I understood, it's a prevention practice, like the upstream one, like to prevent something in the longer run. So my question is more if you just prevent through architecture and through the buildings and solutions that you develop, or if you do other kind of work in your company that also prevents these kind of situations.
So if I understand your question, you're asking if our efforts to work upstream is only confined into the field of architecture, where we basically like figure out like projects before they become projects, or if we... I'm just clarifying your question. If I understand correctly, you're asking if our efforts to work upstream is confined on the architecture projects only, or if we do it in other aspects of... Okay. No, we do it like in every aspect of our society, of our community. We invested in almost all conversations happening in the country. We participate in politics at local community level. We participate in like conversations about policy and funding and trying to solve housing problems and pandemics and all of these sort of conversations, because that work for architects is very, very important in how we work downstream when we're designing buildings and like projects that we work on. And as a practice, we've also like committed to not only design and build projects that we say promotes health and dignity, but to advocate for it. That it's actually in our mission. We've written it down. We not only build, but we advocate for it. So we have to be in these spaces, insisting that architects have a say in it, and we can contribute. I don't know if that answers the question, but yes.
Okay, and I will, because we're running out of time and not getting small nudges from Natalia. Unfortunately, we have a chance to hear more next year. But I have one comment or one thing I want you to make a short comment on. So now we are in the School of Architecture, and I can see that you're interested in education.
Yes.
But education is probably also more. You also have this strong interest in craft. When I look at your project, so it's always about finding this builder at the building site who actually kind of have the talent for cutting these stones.
Yeah.
How do you see education in a kind of a broader sense in architecture and the built environment? Do we have how do we improve that?
How do we improve that? I really hope I have an answer to that question.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. How do we improve it? I mean, like the critique I have with formal education is that it has convinced us that we learn in very specific moments. And I think that's not true. I think we learn every day, everywhere. We learn before we come to formal education. We learn much more when we leave formal education. So I think reframing the role of formal education for me is probably like the biggest chance of like, being very honest with what we can achieve and not achieve with formal education. And like, then calibrating it in a way that is helpful for the time we spend in formal education. I take myself as an example. I tell people that I'm not ashamed to say that I went to China. I had no idea what I was getting into. I was 19. We make a lot of bad decisions when we are 19. I don't think going to China for me was one of them. But I'm also not ashamed to say that I've had to unlearn everything that I feel like I've learned in my formal education in China and relearn how to practice architecture in Rwanda, because the context in which I learned architecture in China is very different from where I practice. But there are many professionals right now as we speak who, because they came to school in Germany, or if you ask them to design a building in Kigali, they will rely on that knowledge they acquired in Germany. They understand the construction technology, they understand how to produce a CD set of a building designed in Germany. And because of how the world has become a global village, it's possible to specify something and then you order it online. They ship it like in 4 weeks is in Kigali. And the person flies from, I don't know, Stuttgart and comes to Kigali and install the system and everything, and they leave. It's very easy. It's a process that we've accepted that it's okay. We think it's fine, but it's not. Because in that process that we rely on for efficiency, for predictability, for basically like, I know how much it's going to cost me because we are in a developer-driven world. We forget that we are imposing a knowledge into a context that is not ready to receive and absorb it. And for me, like the formal education needs to change that in us. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. It's sure, because it's kind of it's asking for new ways of education. I think we need to reconsider the way, not only in Africa but also here, that there's so many ways that we need to rethink the way we're learning. It's not something you do in 5 years only in a school of architecture. It's something you do your entire life before you come here and after, and you do it with many other professions all the time, even when you're not aware.
You're right. If I was to simplify, I would say formal education would be useful if it teaches how to learn.
Yeah.
If it teaches how to unlearn and relearn, because that's what you're not going to see in our day-to-day encounters with people in our communities, in the work and everything else. But formal education has that capacity of telling you like how to nimble your brain so that it can take or leave certain knowledges depending on the situations you're in.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for taking the time. It was a great pleasure.